Hi there, it's Anna from Dazzling Books, and today I will be sharing with you my most memorable reads of 2018, as well as just casually telling you the highlights of last year as a reading year. And I feel like this is so far away from the appropriate timeline that I put out this video, but last year deserved this kind of video because it had been a really good reading year. I set out to read 50 books, as I do every year, and by the end of last year I actually reached 52. I feel like that was easy for me to do so, even though I was really busy, because I read the majority of them like at the start of the year. And what made me happy other than that is how I ventured out of my comfort zone. So I read a lot of young adult books, right? I mean, this channel is pretty much about that. But last year I actually read non-fiction books, and I read poetry books and adult books, and I specifically seeked out books that are by Asian American authors. So those especially who are Chinese Americans or Taiwanese Americans or Vietnamese Americans. That's because that identity and the stories that they tell and like what made them them just resonate deep in me. So I'm really glad that I read those books and I seeked out those authors. And more than that, I also tried to find those people, like podcasts by them and like YouTube channels by them. So I'm really surrounding myself with like stories that are relatable to me and like make me feel comforted and make me feel represented, and like makes me open up more about those kind of things that they talk about in books to real life people. So that was really nice. I also like how I found books not just from the Booktube or the Goodreads community, but I would find books from like self-growth YouTubers or from podcasts. Or I read this column on the pod, it's called Ask Polly, and I found out that the authors had books. So I read those books, and those books I enjoyed, and those books informed what I read this year. I realized that I can read more books about psychology and like how we interact with people and why we interact with people and all of that. So that was really nice. Also, last year I tend to be on a roll per authors that I read. I would read like 2 to 3 books from the same author, like back to back. Those authors are A.S. King, Sarah Dessen, Morgan Matson, and surprisingly, Rikako Akiyoshi, who is a Japanese author that I discovered last year. So with that, I'm gonna transition to my most memorable reads of 2018 because Rikako Akiyoshi's books is one of them. So by most memorable, I do mean that when I read the list of books that I read, I would be like, oh yeah, I remember that book with that narrative really clearly, or like, yeah, I remember how this made me feel very clearly. But actually for most of the books that I'm going to mention, they're here because they are memorable in that way, but they're also very impactful for me. So yeah, let's start the list with what I've just talked about, which is a book by Rikako Akiyoshi, and the title is Holy Mother. Holy Mother is this mystery thriller revolving a murder of a child, of a boy in a city or in an area in Japan. And this story follows that and the tension that makes to the people, but especially to this mother who's really worried about her child's safety after that murder, and like how far she would go to keep the safety of her child. I really went into this book without knowing anything, and I felt like that was a really good way to do so. I enjoyed the way that the story unfolded. I would say that the most that I remember from it was the tension, and how much I liked the way the author kept me going. Like, it was very gripping. It was a mystery thriller book. That's something that I didn't know that I would enjoy, but I did. Because of that, I actually read a couple of books from her. I did not like them as much as Holy Mother, but I'm still very much interested in anything that she writes. The second one is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This is actually her debut novel, and I read her newer novel first before this one. That's because the premise of the book wasn't that interesting to me. I don't really like a book with the premise of someone dying at the start of the book, but with this book I went into it because I love Celeste's writing, and I'm glad that I read this book because I can feel the atmosphere when I was reading the book, even as I'm just thinking about my reading experience. Even like the pacing and the sentences, it was really good. It's a book that's very haunting, but at the same time very peaceful. So the story is about Lydia, which is the daughter of the family. She went missing and then she was found dead in the lake. This is the story of how Lydia's death became the crack in a seemingly really polished family, and how the family dealt with the death and what it meant, what could lead up to the death The Family Secret. Another thing that made an impact for me was A List of Cages, and that's because this book was one of the most emotional books that I read last year. I have a review about it, and for me this book was essentially about what is the meaning of friendship, and it's also a reminder to be kind. If you want to know about it, I will link my review below, and I actually really recommend it to everybody. It's a young adult book, it's easy to read, and you will feel a lot when you read this book, so give it a try. The other book is Alona Olefin is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This was quite an odd book. It was a really interesting experience reading this book because Alona Olefin is not exactly a very likable character, and to be in a narrative where you follow this character like through their mind was interesting. As she was being judgmental towards other people, I was being judgmental of her, and by the end of this book I ended up really sympathizing with the character, and that made me really like the book. It stayed with me for quite a long time, and that's why I'm not surprised at all that it made to a lot of people's list of memorable books as well. The other book that made an impact for me was Becoming Unstoppable by Elizabeth and also Maria Rahajang, the twins, who are influencers and also e-Asia host in Indonesia. Funnily enough, because of my job now, I actually met Maria and Alice a couple of times. And both time, I assure you, I was really awkward and mumbly mess, but they were really kind, and the first time that I met them, they actually recognized my face from my review, so that was great. This book made it to this list because I did learn to seek out opportunities in the fashion industry the way they did, and that led me to actually meeting them, which was like really bizarre and inspiring. The last book in here is The Power of Habit. It's like a really recommended book by many people to change a habit. You can't just force change to it without knowing why you do that habit or why you do that bad habit and what is the trigger and the reward of that habit. And to change the habit, you have to then change the trigger and change the reward, or just change the trigger or the way you do things for the same reward. Well, because of this book, I actually built the habit of putting sunscreen on. Another thing that it helped me with was to work out and like to actually know what motivates me to work out and keep doing it. That has been quite a long month for me, which has been unusual this past year because I haven't been doing that at all, unless it's on Instagram stories, which I don't proofread, and like I don't need to talk. It's just my fingers, you know. Anyway, thank you so much if you made it this far. Let me know what book made an impact in your life, and as always, I will see you in my next video. Bye.